Okay, I'm going to tell you about two theopanies I've had in my life. And just like Anthony, I didn't know what they were. 10 years ago, I was watching TV and I saw Jensen Franklin do a sermon on theopany. And it was a word I never heard before. And people had come to him telling him of their experiences. So he explained it in this sermon. And it wasn't until 10 years ago that I even knew what had happened to me. An example of a theopany, I'm going to give you a couple of them. It's the visual presence of either God the Father, God the Son, or God the Holy Spirit, usually in Holy Spirit form. The first theophany that we see in the Bible is when Moses was drawn to the burning bush. And God told Moses, he said, remove thy sandals, for you're standing on holy ground. And we know it was God because when Moses said, when God told him to go rescue the children from Egypt, Moses asked him, he said, who should I say sent me? And God gave us the first name of many names that we've ever heard. He said, tell them I am sent you. I am that I am. So that was a theophany, the presence of God. Another theophany is, remember Saul that was later named Paul? This happens in Acts when he was on the road to Damascus with his caravan and was going to Damascus to kill and arrest Christians. And all of a sudden there was this huge bright light that appeared over the caravan. And all the people in the caravan were like that. But it was only Saul or Paul that heard the voice. And the voice said, Saul, Saul, why did thou persecute me? And Saul said, who is this, Lord? And he said, this is Jesus. Nobody else in that caravan heard the voice, only Saul. So those are two examples of theophanies. Now I'm going to begin my story. Right after the first grade, it was myself, my dad, my mom, my sister, and my other sister here, Donna, was on the way when my real dad just took off. He abandoned us. So we were living in Tyler. My mother had a brother and sister, or brother and his wife, living in Waco that had no children. So the next day, they just came and got us, and all of a sudden, we're in a 2-bedroom house in Waco, Texas. So my aunt, very godly woman, my mother, very godly woman. As we were being raised, my mother would teach us prayers. We'd kneel beside our bed, and she'd teach us prayers. And the first prayer she taught us was, now lay me down to sleep. The second prayer, as we got older, was the Lord's Prayer. So my mother was teaching us that. My aunt would take me to a little Baptist church on Sundays and drop me off. And when I was 9 years old, I was sitting there in that pew by myself. The pastor, Brother Smith, made the altar call. And I remember it like it was yesterday. I walked down the pew, I walked down the aisle, and at age 9, I gave my life to Christ. A week later, I was baptized. Okay, now let's jump forward to where I'm 10 years old. I'm walking to school. It's about a mile to school. And every afternoon, me and a couple of my little guy friends would walk back home across this big field in Waco called Richfield. It's just north of 41st Avenue. And people would dump their garbage out there. So me and my two little guy friends, every day was like a treasure hunt. People would dump their old rusty screwdrivers and pliers, and women would throw out their old costume jewelry. So every day was like a treasure hunt for us. But this one particular spring day, this beautiful day, the parents of my two little guy friends picked them up for something. I'm walking home by myself, which is great. I'm thinking, hey, I get all the loot today that I find. But I got in the middle of that rich field. Have you ever just had an uneasy feeling? I just stopped in the middle of that field and had a really uneasy feeling. I had goosebumps. And I'm just standing there. It's a bright sunshine, shiny day. I'm 10 years old. And within a second, I am cocooned inside of a bright, fleshy-colored mist. And I can't see anything around me. And it scared the living daylights out of me. So I'm inside of this thing. I'm looking up, trying to figure out how to get out of it. And I look up and I see hundreds of golden broken threads coming down diagonally that went right through me. And I just was going, oh, that is the most wonderful feeling I've ever had in my life. And actually, those golden broken threads were love. I saw it, I experienced it, and I felt it. That's the only way I can tell you. And I was just, oh, this is wonderful. I had no earthly idea what it was. And then all of a sudden, in the midst of that, there was a still small voice that said, you're here for a reason. You're here for a reason. I'm 10 years old. And it went away. It was gone, just that fast. So I'm standing there. No, don't go away. I mean, I was feeling wonderful. So I ran home. My aunt was in the kitchen ironing. I said, Aunt Ford, let me tell you what happened to me on the way home from school today. And I told her, and she patted me on the head. She said, Ron, you got such a vivid imagination. I said, but Aunt Ford, it was so real. My mom comes home from work. And I said, Mom, let me tell you what happened to me on the way home from school. And I told her. She patted me on the head. Said, Ron, you got such a vivid imagination. So I'm 10 years old. Grown-ups are always correct. So I'm thinking, maybe I did imagine that. Okay, that's when I was 10 years old. My mother remarried 5 years later, or a few years later. We moved to Pasadena, Texas. That's how we got our name Mumford, because Fred Mumford, our stepdad, adopted us. Fred Mumford's a good man. He was a tough guy. He was a combat vet. He crawled across Europe with Patton for 2.5 years. Tough guy, but good man. So when we get to Pasadena, my stepdad, my mother, and 2 sisters, they're going to the Church of Christ. I found me another little Baptist church, South Avenue Baptist in Pasadena, and I started going there until I was about 16 years old. And when I was 16, I pretty much said, thanks God, I'll take it from here. I mean, I was getting ready to get my driver's license. I was on the Pasadena High School football team, noticing girls. So I just thought, I should have remembered Romans 12:2, that said, be ye not of this world, but be a new and different creature through Christ. But I didn't. I answered the call of the world. And as a matter of fact, that was when I was 16. I won't go through all the details. I didn't start going back to church until I was 48 years old. I was in the world. Well, anyway, I was in college. I'd gone to A&M. Then I went to San Jacinto College in Pasadena. And then I transferred to University of North Texas. I was having a blast. Heaviest thing I picked up was a beer can, party animal. But back then, the draft was on. You had 4 years, deferment for college. In your 5th year, you were susceptible to being drafted. Well, I was in my 5th year because I lost some hours getting up there. And all of a sudden one day, I got a letter signed by Richard Nixon. It said, greetings. I'd already signed up for the Navy to be a jet pilot. But the Army got me, and there's nothing I could do about it. Anyway, So I come home. I'm getting ready to go to the Army. I go to Fort Bliss, El Paso for boot camp. And boot camp lasts 8 weeks. I reported to boot camp there in the New Mexico desert during the heat of the year in the summer. I weighed 220 pounds. 5 weeks later, I weighed 178. I thought I was going to die, but I didn't. We all thought we was going to die, but we didn't. And then I went to artillery training at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, learned how to shoot cannons. I got home 30 days, and I remember the day that my parents took me to Houston Intercontinental to put me on the plane to go to Fort Lewis, Washington to depart for Vietnam. And my dad, having been a combat soldier, could see the anxiety, a little bit of angst going on. So he called me over, he got me aside, and he said, Ron, treat this like a big adventure. You're going to go places you've never been, see people you've never seen, do things you've never done. So treat each day as an adventure. And that just completely changed my attitude. I went, this is going to be an adventure. So he put me on the plane, went to Fort Lewis, went to Vietnam. I was in the Americal Division, I Corps, which is up north in Vietnam. The only thing north of us was the 1st Marine Division. July was the division headquarters. They shipped me to the 11th Light Infantry Brigade, which was 50 miles south of July Division headquarters. And it was in the boondocks near a little village called Duck Bow. And when I checked in, I figured they're going to assign me to a gun battery, shoot cannons. But the guy that checked me in had 2 patches on his sleeve, said combat correspondent, combat photographer. I said, hey, you need another one of those guys. He said, yeah, I'm getting short. What's your background? I said, I was a journalism major in college. I write stories. I took photography courses. I know how to take pictures. I know how to develop the film and print pictures. I do all that. He said, you're my new replacement. So right then and there, I became the battalion PIO, Public Information Office. And it was the best job in the whole battalion. I got to go everywhere. We had 4 fire bases, and I got to ride helicopters to all the fire bases. I went on, I got to fly door gunner on a huge loach to do a story on an aerial observer, which is the lieutenant that directs artillery from the air. I got to go out with the infantry out in the jungles and in the rice paddies and do stories on forward observers, which are artillery lieutenants that call in artillery fire from the ground. I went on mine sweeps early in the morning. There was only one highway, but they had to clear that highway every single day. And it was a convoy. There'd be an EOD team on a big dump truck, and there'd be troop carriers and armored personnel carriers, and then a quad 50. Now, quad 50 is one of the baddest weapons in the world. It's 4 50 caliber machine guns with somebody sitting in the middle to operate it, and 2 guys on each side loading it. Quad 50 is a bad boy. And I love riding with the guys. We got ambushed one time, but that's another story. Well, anyway, I'm going to pass this around. This is what a quad 50 looks like. So you can just look at it on both sides. I took all those pictures when I was out with them. But one of the guys or groups that I went on Minesweep was a quad 50 that had a call sign of G55. That's very important. Just remember it, G55. Okay, my superior, who was a sergeant up at July, never came down to Duckfoe. It was a bad place. But one day he just showed up. His name was Rush Wood. He used to be a writer for the Houston Post way back when. And he came up and he said, Ron, have you been noticing all the helicopters coming in, refueling, going north? And I said, yeah, we all have. What is it? He said, it's a big secret operation. He said, there's a place called Camp Duck, and that's Kham, capital D-U-C, that where a little over 2 years ago, we had a huge Green Beret outfit there. And Camp Duck is encircled on 3 sides like a horseshoe of high mountains around it, and Camp Duck is down in the middle, down in the valley. He said over 2 years ago, this huge detachment of Green Berets were completely overrun and killed to a man by the NBA. And shortly after that, the Air Force called in an airstrike with B-52s and completely leveled the whole valley. Nothing was left. So on the second anniversary, the Americal Division was going to go back and reclaim Camp Duck. And I looked at Rush and I said, you lucky dog, you're going to get to go cover that? He said, well, I'm going to tell them I'm not going to go. I said, Rush, you can't do that, man. They'll put you in jail. He said, I know. But he said, I have a son born shortly after I arrived in Vietnam, and this is going to be a dangerous place, and I want to see my son, so I'm not going. And I said, I'll go. Me and my big mouth. He said, you will? So I went, yeah. Man, this is an adventure. So he said, okay, you're going to have to come up to Chulai. I'll put you on a plane. It'll take you to Camp Duck. I said, great. I got off my rucksack, my flak jacket still popped. M16, I looked like Pancho Villa. I had so many clips of ammunition on me. Got my camera, the film. Got to Chulai. He put me on a C-123 because the only way you could get down to this valley is by air, either helicopter or C-123. They had a quick makeshift airstrip there. Well, anyway, we're about to land in Camp Duck, but the plane doesn't just swoop in and land. It's doing this. It's spiraling downward. So I asked the crew chief in that C-123, I said, why don't we just land? He said, the pilot is waiting to see if he draws fire from all 3 sides of that mountain. Sniper fire. If he doesn't, he'll swoop in and land, turn around, offload the cargo, and we're out of here. Well, I've been in country long enough to know this is not good. Long story short, we finally land. I walk down that gangplank, and I'm looking around, and it was one of those eerie feelings. Me and my big mouth. That place was devastated. There were blown up cannons and blown up road graders, and there was nothing, no buildings, no perimeter, no nothing, just a makeshift airstrip, and there were just hundreds of helicopters coming in, people getting on, getting off. And I could hear the artillery, so I didn't have to ask where they were because I was supposed to do stories on them. I could hear them. So right in the midst of this confusion, a guy happened to walk by, and I went, hey, man, what are you doing here? He said, well, we got our quad 50 here. He said, where's your foxhole? Because that's the only place to sleep is in a foxhole. There's no buildings. And I said, I don't have one. He said, well, G55, that's his call sign, quad 50, said, we got a foxhole for 4 people, all 4 people on our gun. One of them's got to stay on the gun, so you're welcome to stay in the foxhole with us. And I said, great. So I unloaded my gear. Just before nightfall, it started raining. You ever slept in a foxhole when it rains? It gets full of water. It's muddy. It's miserable. And we had 100% intel report that we were going to suffer a massive attack. And for the first time in my life, I'm laying there in that hole, and fear just overcame me. And I said the only prayer I could remember, which was, now lay me down to sleep. Well, none of us got any sleep that night. Sun came up the next morning. We brushed the mud off of us. I took my little notebook out, 3 days worth of assignments. I started working those assignments. A lot of them, just every day. The artillery, trying to take pictures over the jungle and the canopies because there was a downed airman down there. And I was trying to take pictures so Army intelligence could find them and rescue them. And I would just one day after the next. And I finished the assignment in 3 days, just like the assignment book called for. Problem is, when I left my unit 50 miles south, I had gone AWOL. And you don't go AWOL in a combat unit. I finished up there in Camduck, I finished the assignment in 3 days, but every single night they said, we're going to be attacked. Now I'm going to send this around. This is the G55 crew. I took this the day before I left. If you'll notice, there's 2 black guys and 2 white guys. And I promise you something, in a combat zone, there's no such thing as race, color, or creed. You're each other's best friend because you're going to protect each other. You send that around. At the end of the 3 days, I should have gotten on a plane and went back to July. I didn't. I felt a bond with these 4 guys. There was going to be an attack, and I wanted to be a part of it. I stayed the 4th day. I stayed the 5th day. I'm really late now. And then at 6 o'clock in the evening, me and these 4 guys from G55, one was here, I was here, other one here, here, and here. We were eating our evening K rations while the last plane of the day was circling down. And it happened again. Right there, elbow to elbow with those guys. Again, I was just encompassed in that bright, misty, fleshy-colored cocoon. And instantaneously, I knew that 14 years before, when it happened when I was 10 years old, that was not a figment of my imagination because it just happened again. But this time, there was no broken threads of gold going through me. This time, there was no still, small voice. I was not walking with God. I had the foulest mouth in the army, but I was not walking with him. So none of that was present except a really commanding voice that said, leave this place now. And it went away. And I was in mid-bite. I put that fork down. I was a little bit confused. I walked over, I picked up my rucksack, flak jacket, steel pot, M16, all my cameras. I didn't even say goodbye to those 4 guys in G55. I just started walking toward the airstrip because the last plane of the day was coming down. And they said, Mumford, where are you going? And I said, I don't know. I'm just going to get on the airplane. And I had no earthly idea where it was going to go. I got there, I walked up the gangplank, and the load master didn't say a word to me. You can't just walk them to an airplane. But they didn't say a word to me. I just sat down. I had no earthly idea where the plane was going. But I was obeying that voice, really commanding voice. Leave this place now. As it turned out, the plane landed in July. I called my buddy Rush Wood. He came over and got me. He said, Mumford, we thought you were dead. You're supposed to be back 2 days ago. And I said, long story. I gave him all the assignment and everything so he could turn in and avoid going to jail. I told him, I said, let's have chow, and then you owe me 57 beers. I said, that's the scariest place I've ever been in my life. So I got back. The plane ride back wasn't very long. So we got something to eat. Went to the NCO club because he was an NCO. I wasn't. I was private first class. And I did have about 57 beers. I was absolutely bombed. And then they took me back to the transit barracks to sleep overnight because I couldn't go back to my unit that night. It was 50 miles away. I got in bed probably about 10:30. At 4:30 in the morning, they came waking me up. Mumford, wake up. Mumford, wake up. And I said, what happened? They said, Kim Duck got hit at 2 a.m. And it just rolled off my tongue. Where did they come in? And he said, at G55. He said, the NBA shot a big mortar trying to take that gun out because a quad 50 is a bad boy. And the mortar was 10 feet long. I mean, it hit 10 feet from its target, and it hit squarely on top of that hole, that foxhole, where we'd all been sleeping. 3 of those guys were vaporized, literally. And had I not followed that voice, I would have been in that hole. One guy that was out on the gun, there was so much shrapnel that they said they're probably going to have to take him to Japan just to put him back together again. But I didn't tell anybody about the cocoon. I didn't tell anybody about the voice. I get back to my unit the next day, hoping that they hadn't missed me. Short chance. They missed me all right. And they started assigning me every terrible detail that they could assign me, which included pulling the cans out from underneath the latrines, filling them up with diesel fuel, lighting them, and standing there with the stick until it was all burned out. They had me doing that. They had me filling sandbags. They had me doing every terrible job on that fire base. And I was just hoping that they wouldn't give me an Article 15 dishonorable discharge and put me in jail, because I had gone AWOL and never contested that. Each month, at the end of the month, the guys that were there in our battalion going home, there would be an award ceremony. And I'd take pictures of the guys getting their Army Commendation Medal, finding out about their hometown newspaper, and sending the picture in the newspaper to their hometown newspaper. The first month that I was in this punishment state, we had a real hardcore lieutenant colonel. And in front of my whole battery, that first month, he said, Mumford, you're not qualified to take pictures of these honorable men. Give your camera to somebody else and you get back. I was embarrassed in front of my whole battery. The second month goes by, and the colonel said, the other guys lined up for their Army Commendation Medals, and the colonel said, give your camera to somebody else. I'm going, here it goes again. You stand over there at the end of that line. Yes, sir. Well, the picture on the back of the G55 picture is a picture of me getting a Bronze Star. Never would have thought. It was actually the first of 2 that I got. I was elevated in rank from PSC to sergeant so fast I didn't have time to put on my other rank. And that's a story of my 2 Theopanies. And if I hadn't obeyed that voice, the first voice when I was a kid said, you're here for a reason. And the second voice said, leave this place now. And if I hadn't have obeyed that voice, I would have been in that hole. And I would not be standing here today to give my testimony. So that's pretty much it. And I'll answer any questions that you may have.